That crisis over the weekend collided with ongoing uproar from within Donald Trump's own party over his actions in Syria, as well as his decision to award the G7 summit of world leaders to his own golf resort, a move he ultimately reversed over the weekend as the pressure from inside the GOP built. So it's against the backdrop of that three-pronged crisis that the president held court today for a lie-filled question and answer session with reporters that was so full of inaccuracies and misrepresentations that we're showing it to you to illustrate his delusions, not to amplify them. Consider yourself warned.
Well, I made a perfect call, not a good call, perfect call. In fact, a friend of mine who's a great lawyer said, did you know this would be the subject of all of this scrutiny? Because the way you express yourself, this is like a perfect call. Everyone said the Kurds helped us. That's true. We helped the Kurds. They're no angels, but we helped the Kurds. And we never gave the Kurds a commitment that we'd stay for the next 400 years and protect them. They've been fighting with the Turks for 300 years that people know of. I think they're lousy politicians. But two things they have. They're vicious, and they stick together. They don't have Mitt Romney in their midst. They don't have people like that. Other presidents, if you look, other presidents were wealthy. Not huge wealth. George Washington was actually considered a very, very rich man at the time. But they ran their businesses. George Washington, they say, had two desks. He had a presidential desk and a business desk. I don't think you people with this phony emoluments clause, and by the way, I would say that it's cost me anywhere from $2 to $5 billion to be president. And that's okay. Between what I lose and what I could have made, I would have made a fortune if I just ran my business.
As for the emoluments clause that Donald Trump there calls phony, well, it's just a section of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, to be specific, which stipulates, quote, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Doesn't seem phony to any of us, nor does the reality that Republican critiques of Trump and his policies are clearly getting under his skin. Critiques underscored by this report over the weekend from Chris Wallace of Fox News.
I talked to a very well-connected Republican in Washington this week, somebody whose name you would know well, who says that if the House votes to impeach and it gets to a trial in the Senate, there is now a 20% chance, he believes, obviously it's just an estimate, now a 20% chance enough Republicans will vote with the Democrats to remove the president.
This reporting from the Washington Post encapsulates the position the White House finds itself in. Quote, President Trump, whose paramount concern long has been showing strength, has entered the most challenging stretch of his term, weakened on virtually every front and in danger of being forced from office as the impeachment inquiry intensifies. From our friend Phil Rucker, that's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. The aforementioned Phil Rucker at the table, which we love, White House Bureau Chief for the Washington Post, Matt Miller, former Chief Spokesman for the Department of Justice, Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn.org, Karine Jean-Pierre, plus former Republican Congressman, now an independent, David Jolly. Take us through that reporting, because it seems to put the finest point of all on everything we're seeing and exactly where this White House is, and it's my understanding some of them even acknowledge it's where they are.
Well, Nicole, if you look at the last couple of weeks for this administration, it's been weakness on every front. You start with Syria. The president was, his plea was rejected by President Erdogan of Turkey. A number of Republican senators, allies of President Trump, spoke out against him. You look at what's happening with the G7 decision, the backlash from Republican lawmakers to the idea of Trump holding this international summit of world leaders at his own personal property. And you look at the impeachment inquiry. The White House put out that letter a few weeks ago saying nobody in this administration is going to cooperate with what they saw as a kangaroo court inquisition of an impeachment inquiry, and yet one after another officials in the government, including political appointees of President Trump's, have been going to Capitol Hill and testifying for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, telling all behind closed doors to Democratic investigators. And that just speaks to the trouble that President Trump has politically right now, where he does not have control over his own party, over his own government. He also doesn't have control over conservative media. You're seeing Drudge Report, Fox News, other media organs that support the president turning on him in various ways and to various degrees.
And I get different glimpses into the kind of grasp or lack of it that Trump has on his new reality. I was told today that he understands that the Republicans in the Senate are the only things standing between him and removal from office, that he will be impeached. But that doesn't explain the ongoing conduct and the refusal to pull back in his decision on Syria, which has been universally critiqued.
Well, I think, Nicole, the people around the president see that as the reality, that he will probably be impeached by the House. The momentum's going in that direction. It's unclear if Trump himself recognizes that and truly understands the peril. This is someone who said when he campaigned for office that he could shoot somebody in broad daylight on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. And that's been his mindset in office. He knows that those Republican senators are going to have his back no matter what he does, because they've had it again and again and again through all these transgressions. And this potentially could be different. I mean, we have to see how the process unfolds, but there are people around the president who tell me, just like they tell you, that this is a real moment of concern for him.
I wonder, too, I mean, for all the other crises, it was racism around Charlottesville. It was things that seemed to debase the office. And his base has proven immune from the debasement of the office of the presidency. But I wonder if it's immune from endangerment. I mean, he is now endangering the United States and our allies by leaving ISIS roaming around Europe, and it's not too far from Europe to here. He's now projecting, as you said, weakness. When he says Stonewall Congress, and there's literally a parade of people from the executive branch heading up to Congress. I mean, weakness and incompetence and endangering the public are not things he's tested his base for.
No, and one of the most startling things happened Saturday night pretty late when the president tweeted he was going to pull back, reverse course, and fold on his decision to have that G7 summit at Doral, at his own property. We've not really seen that from him before. We've not seen him fold and cave to public pressure the way he did this weekend. We actually had to go in and update this season of weakness story to add a new fresh data point late Saturday night to make the front page of the Sunday paper, because we've just not seen that, and that was really startling, and I think a reminder for the people watching all of this that the Republicans in Congress are actually standing up on that issue.
You know, I watched this administration the way new parents watch the baby monitor, you know, for any like flashes of movement, because having worked in the White House, you sort of know the signs of dissent, and you tweeted about one that I noticed as well. The Justice Department distancing itself from Rudy Giuliani. I mean, and you've got Mike Pompeo with this spectacularly horrific appearance on this Sunday show yesterday that I understand from a couple sources he was very grumpy about. You've got Mulvaney, who had his clock cleaned by Chris Wallace. I mean, the weakness and the failure is everywhere.
It feels like a moment to me where people inside the administration are starting to think more about their personal future than they are about the future of the administration. That is the reason why you see some of these witnesses come up and be willing to testify. I think some of the witnesses are coming because they actually feel it's their patriotic duty to do so, but then you have other people like Gordon Sondland who are worried that their reputations are going to be destroyed. I suspect, you know, it's hard to know why Mick Mulvaney did what he did at his press conference. I suspect the reason he did it is because people were starting to leak about his involvement in withholding the aid, and he wanted to get out there and make sure.
I mean, Fiona Hill testified in 9.5 hours of testemony that John Bolton sent her to the lawyer assigned to the NSC because he was so scared about it.
That's right.
Drug deal.
And I think he wanted to get out there and make clear everyone knew it was the president that had made that decision.
It was the president's drug deal.
It wasn't Mick Mulvaney. That's right. It wasn't Mick Mulvaney's drug deal. He was just the courier. So I think that is a dangerous spot for the administration to be in when you have all of these people. The Justice Department, the Secretary of State wasn't really willing to defend some of the things on the Sunday show yesterday, starting to worry that this thing is going badly enough that they don't want to go down with it.
Well, and it would seem that in the testimony, and if you're really just worried about a universe of 34 senators, if they're smart, they can now stitch together a fact pattern that points directly to Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani.
Not only can they put together the fact pattern, but I think the thing that makes this different from Charlottesville and all of the other things he's asked them to bear over the last almost 3 years is this time they're going to have to vote. You know, Republican senators have gotten very good at, you know, looking at their phones when they're walking down the halls and reporters ask them questions or giving answers like, I didn't see that tweet, or I don't respond to the tweets, or just not having to weigh in on all of the things he does that debase the office. But the difference is now they're going to have to vote when this gets to the Senate, and the explanations the White House has given them, the propositions they're being asked to endorse, that it's okay to ask a foreign government to interfere in the election, that it's okay to, briefly, it's okay to condition aid, or it's at least okay to condition a meeting with the president on him launching an investigation, which isn't in dispute. That was in Kurt Volker's text messages and are not disputed. That's a tough thing for a Republican senator to endorse, and if the White House doesn't come up with some better answers, that's what they're going to have to do if they vote not to convict and remove him from office.
So color me skeptical that there are 34 spines on Capitol, or I guess you need 20 Republican spines to vote to convict. But here are a couple trying to show that they have spines: Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham.
Going on TV and saying, China, will you investigate my political opponent is wrong. It's a mistake. It was shocking in my opinion, for the president to do so, and a mistake for him to do so. I can't imagine coming to a different point of view. We certainly can't have presidents asking foreign countries to provide something of political value that is, after all, against the law.
Are you open-minded if more comes out that you could support impeachment?
Sure. I mean, show me something that is a crime. If you could show me that, Trump actually was engaging in a quid pro quo outside the phone call, that would be very disturbing.
Well, he engages in a quid pro quo on the phone call where he says, I have to ask you a favor, though. Fiona Hill, I believe, has testified that by the summer, this past summer, the military aid was attached to investigations into Burisma that would damage the Bidens. I'm not sure what Lindsey's waiting for.
So the votes may not be there today, but let's see what happens by December, because every United States senator is witnessing what we're witnessing. This is a lawless and deceitful man peddling in ignorance, unworthy, nearly impossible to defend if you're a United States senator on a daily basis. And this is where the calling of history really is upon 53 Republican senators. The president has set his legacy in stone. We know it. Republican senators now have a chance to do the same for theirs. We know the president professed to wanting to violate the emoluments clause. An emolument is a profit. He tried to sole source the Trump organization a contract. We know he was named in a criminal conspiracy in New York. We know he obstructed justice in the Mueller report. We know he's obstructed Congress, and we know he's abused his office by asking Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. It is not, as Marco Rubio said, the president joking with the press. It's not, as Lindsey said in another interview, Democrats trying to destroy the nation. It's not, as Marsha Blackburn said, a witch hunt. And for Susan Collins, it is more than inappropriate. For Ted Cruz, it's not a lynch mob. And for John Cornyn, it's not just politics. It's about the Constitution. And I think the reporting late today that the House is considering a clear abuse of power article, it inevitably is going to go in that direction, because I don't see how Mitt Romney votes no on a clear abuse of power article. And I think there will be other senators that follow as well. The question is, do you send over other articles or not? But for the first time, I think there's a period now in the next 6, 8, 10 weeks where we might see more Republican senators speak out.
Well, let me just lay this down clearly, because I've been struggling and grasping for some sort of parallel to the Republican senators that really they acted as an independent body during the Bush administration. Can you imagine if George W. Bush had asked the Israelis for help in finding hanging Chads? Can you imagine? He would have been impeached in 6 weeks by John Cornyn, by Ted Cruz, who hated his guts, by all these guys. What is the Trump spell
Imagine
that he has on them?
If a sitting United States senator running for president, let's say Elizabeth Warren, took to a microphone and said, Iran, will you lead an investigation into the Trump's kids profiting off of contracts in Saudi Arabia? What do you think Lindsey Graham would do about that? It certainly wouldn't be to say, oh, it's no big deal, nothing I heard would violate any law or constitution. They'd bring it up for censure in the United States Senate. There is hypocrisy, but to Matt's point, this is going to be the first time Republican senators have to vote, and whether you like Lindsey Graham or not, whether you think he's a wise man or not, he said one thing of wisdom to me about 6 years ago. He said, presidents come and go, senators last forever. These senators are going to be around long after Donald Trump is gone, and this vote matters.
And you have to go back 6 years to find something smart Lindsey said. I'll let that be the lead here. The Democrats so far have not made a misstep. They haven't taken the bait on all the attacks on Adam Schiff. They haven't dumped everything that we could come up with sitting around here into the impeachment investigation. And they have produced a stream of witnesses, and most of the information is flowing from the witnesses themselves or their attorneys. It would have
just following showing the facts, right? They're trying to not make this political, which is probably the smartest thing that they're doing. They're just saying, look, we know he made a criminal, ask of Ukraine, and we have an impeachment inquiry, and we're going to follow that, and that's it. End of story. I think you said something earlier that I really wanted to lean in on a little bit. You said that there was a line cross, right? We had all these domestic abuses, right? We had Charlottesville, we had babies in cages, and nothing moved. Separation, nothing moved with the Republicans. But this is something that's so clear cut, right? We're talking about national security, right? When we look at Syria, we're talking about national security. When we look at Ukraine, we're talking about weakness. We look at the G7, corruption. And I think it's a place where Republicans could not. They had to say something, even privately and quietly. They had to say something. Even with the G7, Donald Trump was shocked that Republicans said something. And it showed that Republicans can have influence on this president. And so I think this is where we are right now, because he's crossed a line. And he's also shown that he has no loyalty. Loyalty is only one direction, and that's towards him.
I mean, I guess the only sort of deepening of that analysis on my part would be that it's the brazenness, because I think he crossed the line in all those other instances too. Right. He just didn't stand on the south lawn of the White House and do it in front of the cameras, China, if you're listening. Admit it. Right. I mean, so I think that part of what has maybe woken them up from their stupor, their slumber, whatever you want to call it, is the brazenness.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, he basically admitted to the criminality, and just as it doesn't matter.
He made a T-shirt about it.
He made a T-shirt about it, right? And I mean, with Mulvaney, he said two things that were true, right? He said basically he admitted to the quid pro quo, and he said, get over it. You guys need to get over it. And so that is where Donald Trump is. I mean, he is who he is. The wheels are not off. They've been off for a long time. I mean, he is just unfit, and you can't hide that anymore.
Nicole, I think the seminal moment in all of this, as Rucker and others look back and report on it years from now, is going to be when the White House released the summary of the phone call where Donald Trump says, please investigate the Bidens. Because for the 53 senators, for the 100 senators, but the 53 Republicans, that was the moment from which you can't get back. Nothing exculpates the president from there. Every witness corroborates it, but that's the reason no United States senator is saying he did nothing wrong. It's because Donald Trump released the summary.
Where he does everything wrong. Right. When we come back, when you've lost Sean Hannity, Donald Trump's chief of staff was called dumb by the president's defender-in-chief, Sean Hannity, for confessing to the transgression at the heart of Trump's impeachment and his failed effort at cleanup yesterday on Fox News that didn't go well. We'll show it to you. Also ahead, as Donald Trump blunders into the biggest foreign policy mistake of his presidency, one that leaves ISIS free to attack again, he calls his defense secretary by the wrong name, erasing any doubt that when it comes to U.S. national security, it's Donald Trump and his big brain against the world. And Steve Schmidt is back. He weighs in on impeachment and more. Don't go anywhere. The White House Chief of Staff's on-camera confession to the act of corruption at the heart of Donald Trump's impeachment investigation is a plot twist no one saw coming. But that smoking gun may not be what cost him his job. The television-obsessed president could not have liked this appearance by Mulvaney on Fox News Sunday.
You were asked specifically by Jonathan Karl, was investigating Democrats one of the conditions for holding up the aid? Was that part of the quid pro quo? And you said it happens all the time.
Yeah, but go back and watch what I said before that. I don't know if you guys can cue it up or not. There was a long answer about corruption and a long answer about
totally said that.
Just like I told you then, and then I said the exact same thing I just said now, which is, did he mention in passing? Yes. But the reason that we held back the aid were the two reasons I mentioned.
Not only did you say that investigating the Democrats was one of the three conditions, not two, that you had just said that you had talked about. Investigating the Democrats was part of the quid pro quo. You also said, if I may, it was part of the Justice Department investigation into the origins of the Russia pro?
There is not a quid pro quo.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl. You've described a quid pro quo, and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo.
In your first answer, which I gave, you said that's why we held up the money. First, you just said here that it was for 2 reasons. Now you're acknowledging it was for 3 reasons. If you held up the money for 3 reasons, that's a quid pro quo. You got to satisfy us on those. Now, maybe the president backed off that, but that was the proposition here.
No, I'm not acknowledging there's 3 reasons. Again, let's go back.
You said 3 reasons.
Go back to I recognize that.
Chris Wallace doing an amazing job pressing Mulvaney on the original confession, which included a detailed list of 3 conditions that the aid to Ukraine was tied to.
3 issues for that: the corruption in the country, whether or not other countries were participating in the support of the Ukraine, and whether or not they were cooperating in an ongoing investigation with our Department of Justice. That's completely legitimate.
But Mulvaney's not the only one drowning in flop sweat after disastrous appearances on yesterday's Sunday shows. Here's Mike Pompeo with George Stephanopoulos.
I'm telling you what I saw transpiring and how President Trump was working to make the evaluation about whether it was appropriate to provide this assistance.
But that's what I'm asking is, would it be appropriate to condition that?
Yeah, George, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals and secondary things based on what someone else has said. George, you would have never done it when you were the spokesman. I'm not going to do it here today.
Except it's not a hypothetical. We saw the chief of staff, the acting
It is, George. You just said George, you just said if this happened. That is by definition a hypothetical.
The chief of staff said it did.
George, you asked me if this happened. It's a hypothetical. I've told you what I observed, what I saw the process related to this very funding.
I was a communications director for a White House that didn't get a lot of points for communicating. That was the worst appearance by an executive branch official I've ever seen in my career.
It also was the longest 3-second pause in any answer.
When Colin Powell's aide swung the camera away, I cringed less. And I'm not, I got no dog in this. That was unbelievable. What's he hiding?
I wish we could answer that. I mean, clearly, we saw this with Mulvaney, but also with Pompeo. These guys are trying to distance themselves from the problem without engaging
the witnesses. Let me just try to understand that, because I'm sure the witnesses all worked for that guy. Yeah. What is he distancing himself? Either he was the most incompetent and detached Secretary of State in the nation's history, had no idea that everyone that worked at the State Department was hair on fire, alarmed and concerned about the corruption being carried out by Rudy Giuliani, or he was part of it. That's it. Those are Pompeo's only pass.
And then one piece of context about Secretary Pompeo: he's not a Secretary of State who spends all of his time traveling and not in touch with the president and running his own operation. He's literally in the Oval Office multiple times a week. He has lunch every week with the president. He is around. He's one of the president's closest advisors on tons of issues beyond the portfolio of the State Department. So the idea that he didn't know what was going on or wasn't aware of these conversations just doesn't match up with everything that we know about how he conducts himself as the secretary.
So I should say that a lot of my Republican friends say he's great off TV. Really?
Nicole, they're all guilty. Yeah. I mean, you could turn the sound off and watch an interview with Pompeo, an interview with Mulvaney, an interview with Mike Pence until they've got something to hide. Think about it. Von Hillier asked, Von Hillier cornered, not even cornered, just asked him in a spray, asked Mike Pence something, and he couldn't answer the question. This is Pompeo's second time coming off of Nashville last week. Mick Mulvaney showed us what he's trying to hide over the weekend. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. One of the reasons I think senators are so tepid in their defense of the president is the normal Washington actors that would give them a stakeholder defense would be Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, or Mick Mulvaney, the establishment Republicans. But they're looking at those three saying, what are these clowns doing in the circus car? Because something bad went down and because nobody has a good excuse for it.
So let me just drill down on this. I mean, Pompeo either had no idea that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine was being trashed by Rudy Giuliani and other appointees that Gordon Sondland, the Trump-appointed ambassador to the EU, was really uncomfortable that Donald Trump had directed him to work with Rudy, or he was a part of it. I mean, he was either calling the plays or oblivious to them.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Look, I think you have the president's men, Pompeo, Pence, and Mulvaney, and Mick Mulvaney, and they are supposed to spin this away, right? They're supposed to make this better, because we have to understand the president is watching this. This is their job, and you can't spin this away. Right? You can't, I mean, there's nothing you can do to really say that Donald Trump didn't do anything or no one knew anything that happened, because he admitted to it. Donald Trump himself admitted to all of it. And so I think that's the problem, that when you can't, so many lies come out of this administration, they can't keep it straight, but also you can't turn something that it's not. You can't make something that didn't happen or happen not happen. And I think that's the problem they're having.
I also think that the idea that Mick Mulvaney was sent out on Chris Wallace to do, you know, the Rudy version with Chuck Todd, you know, Truth Isn't Truth, or Kellyanne. He doesn't have it. Yeah. I mean, Kellyanne and Rudy Giuliani have it. They can stand there and say, up is down, down is up. Mick Mulvaney doesn't have it, whatever it is. And maybe that's a good thing. I mean, maybe the confession becomes part of the impeachment thing. But the idea that he had I mean, I worked with Chris Wallace the entire time I worked in Republican politics, and you leave your BS and your lies behind when you sit on that man's set.
Well, just think about what he's asking us to believe, that there were two reasons that the aid was held up. One was corruption, which the president never mentioned in this phone call to Zelensky. The other was that the Europeans weren't doing their part. And then there was this third thing that wasn't a reason, that was this Ukraine server issue, which the server, by the way, isn't in Ukraine. It's at the DNC.
Which Tom Bossert told us on television that he told the president over and over again was malarkey.
And so Mulvaney wants us to believe that the president was concerned about that, but that wasn't a reason that the aid was withheld, even though the president went out of his way to bring it up on the phone call to Zelensky. The answer doesn't make sense. That's the ultimate problem here. None of them have done what you're supposed to do at the beginning of managing a scandal like this, which is to figure out the landscape, figure out what all of your exposure is, figure out what happened, and then figure out what you're going to do about it. Are you going to come out and say it didn't happen? Are you going to say it happened, but it was this guy's fault and he's gone? Are you going to say, you know what, we made a mistake, we're going to apologize, it's not impeachable? They've done none of that. They say one day, well, this didn't happen. The next day, it happened, but it's okay. The next day, well, this happened. Oh, wait, I take it back. It actually didn't happen. And they've been all over the place with no answers.
They have no warrant.
I think, David Jolly, when Donald Trump says the call was perfect, what he's saying is it is perfectly fine to tie military aid to dirt on my rivals. I think that we are not hearing him. When he says over and over again, I'm told he says it in private, that the call was perfect. He thinks it's perfectly fine to ask a foreign leader to dig up dirt on it.
And it's why the emoluments clause is phony. This is a very Nixonian chapter for Donald Trump, where if the president does it, then it's necessarily legal. And the inflection point to look for, if we apply some lessons of history, is does there come a moment where the narrative from Mulvaney and Trump's defenders on the Hill pivots to there should be a lesser sentence, not a defense of the president?
Or I take the fifth.
Well, but understand, during Clinton's impeachment, there were 4 articles that were presented, only 2 passed, but at the last minute, Bill Clinton sent Bill Richardson, who was a cabinet secretary at the time, to negotiate with Democrats on a lesser sentence, asking Republicans that controlled the House to vote on a censure resolution because they would get enough Democrats